I'm Leonard and I'm Director of Gay and Lesbian Health Victoria, and that's a research and policy unit that's been set up within La Trobe University. It's government funded, and our brief is to improve the health and wellbeing of LGBTI, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and intersex Victorians. And as one of the things we do is we deliver training across the health, education and the human services sector. And we're one of the first agencies really to develop a suite of training packages. So we train youth services, we train mental health and drug and alcohol services. We also have a program into schools called Safe Schools Coalition. And for each of those services and sectors, we have a tailored training package. So I was approached as part of the training for the accident emergency training here on LGBTI issues to sort of do a bit of an introduction, a 2 or 3 hour introduction using some of my generic training materials. And then Jan was going to deliver an afternoon session looking more at the issues for LGBTI people in disaster and accidents or emergency situations. So that's the roundup of what we do and why I'm here. The way we frame our training, what we call a generic training, so it's an introduction to LGBTI people's everyday lives, is we give some background data on the percentage and numbers of Australians who are LGBT and I, as far as we have that data. We look at some of the data on the health effects of discrimination on this population, particularly in areas like mental health issues, drug and alcohol use, suicide, where we know that the effects of discrimination on this population put them at increased risk of problems in each of those areas. We also have a number of exercises where we try to get participants to think about their own experiences of feeling different, not linked to sexuality or gender identity, but as a sort of empathetic exercise. So it's an opener where people really have to think about times in their life where they felt extremely out of place and to think about those feelings. And we make the point that for most LGBTI people, that's not a one-off situation, that's a way they exist in the world. We then present some videos just explaining, particularly an intersex video on intersex, which is not well known. And then we end looking at some of the issues around how services can start to be more inclusive of LGBTI staff and clients. And we do that through some data and some discussion, but also a series of case studies. And in some ways, that generic training really sets up an afternoon that's specific to any area, not just accident and emergency, but to a whole range of other areas. My understanding is at the beginning of the training, we got people in the room just to go around and say who they were, what area they worked in, what organisation. And everyone in the room works in the area of accident or emergency services, but they work across very different sectors. So there were people there from government, someone from the Premier's Department, someone from the Department of Health and Human Services in their accident emergency, people from the CFA and the MFB. So what you have is people who have in the room who have a shared area that they're working in, but they're working in radically different organisations. So some are on the ground service delivery, some are policy. And that's always interesting regardless of the area you're looking at, because people bring a very different eye then to the issues. So people who work in government who don't necessarily work with clients on the ground are less concerned about the interactions between people and much more concerned about policy. And that makes for if the discussion goes well, a much more lively and vibrant discussion, because although they have a shared interest in the content, they have very different understandings and they come in at very different levels. So one of the case studies today was talking about, working with a client and how they're feeling, and someone at Premier's is talking about the need for policy that acknowledges, and they're two very different levels, and you need a bit of everything going on. But a very receptive audience. The discussion, insofar as you can measure how successful your training is while you're delivering it, you do get a sense of levels of engagement, particularly around the activities, case studies, and where people get up and have to do some physical activities. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of talking, people respectfully disagreeing, and that's a sign of people really engaging with the material. So I think it went well, and I think they're an interesting group. And 2 or 3 people came up and said, look, you really should come and do this for the CFA across the board. They would really benefit, whatever that might be code for. And the same with the MFB. Someone came up and said, we should be doing this sort of training across staff in the MFB. So that's also a good outcome. People can see the relevance of the training. This is a one-off trial as part of I think there are the 3 different training packages, one on gender, one on LGBTI, and I can't remember the third, as part of what Women's Health in the North is putting together. So this is a trial really to see whether it works in this sector and whether it's needed. I'd say from the training today it's definitely needed. Jan, who's doing the last 3 hours or 2 or 3 hours this afternoon, will be looking at LGBTI issues specifically in disaster situations, and that'll be interesting because it's not something I know anything about or a lot about. But when you start to unpick, you can see lots of issues around relief services and assumptions that people are heterosexual, or that they're out, or that they've got family supports, or that they can be linked into community organisations as part of disaster relief. And for LGBTI people, that's often not the case. A whole set of those assumptions just don't work. So I'm assuming that Jan will be teasing out some of those complexities. But no, I'm hoping that whether it's in the disaster area or some of the organisations around the table think we really could use some LGBTI awareness training, even if it's not to do with the accident emergency area, but just to do with our own organisational issues. Because what came out in the discussion is a number of people in that room still talk about not feeling comfortable, or knowing colleagues who are gay or lesbian or trans who are not feeling comfortable in their work cultures, which is slightly different from what that organisation actually delivers on the ground. So I think there's space for this training, even if we just looked at organisational and LGBTI issues, and I'm sure there's space for more training around the particular issues that LGBTI people face in disaster and emergency situations. So we'll see what happens next and what comes out of the evaluation.